Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Your Spiritual Journey. This is Dr. Bob, and this is the space and the place where we talk about things important to your soul. As always, we ask that you like us, leave comments if you will, maybe even support us on Patreon. All of that helps keep us on the air. So today's guest is out in Santa Fe, New Mexico, I believe. Is that right, Juliana?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Juliana Sloane is a skilled hypnotherapist, coach, and Buddhist meditation teacher whose approach blends mindfulness, neuroscience, and psychospiritual tools. Juliana's work centers on guiding sensitive, high-functioning individuals through transformative inner healing using modalities like depth hypnosis and shamanic journey work. Her practice is often described as evidence-based magic, accessible and grounded, yet able to spark meaningful, sustained change from within. Juliana holds an MA in Gender Studies from Central European University, a BA in Religious and Women's Studies from Guilford College, is a Certified Depth Hypnosis Practitioner, Certified Applied Shamanic Practitioner, Community Dharma Leader at Spirit Rock Meditation Center, an Ordained Minister with Foundation of the Sacred Stream, and a Certified Hypnotherapist. Her teaching at respected centers like Spirit Rock and San Francisco Insight affirms her commitment to ethical, caring guidance. She has an engaged audience of over 5,500 spiritual seekers, and she's adept at connecting with those eager for real tools and insight. And I'm going to stop there, although I did want to mention she's also published a recent article in Tricycle, the Buddhist Review. So we'll get into all that after Juliana tells us her spiritual story. So Juliana, if you would, give us your journey from childhood till now, and then I'll ask you some questions.
Absolutely. It's a big question. Great to be here. And, when I think about the journey from childhood to now, some of the first things that come to me are really growing up in nature, really immersed in the natural world. I was very fortunate to grow up in a beautiful, very lush forests and creeks in Pennsylvania, near Philadelphia, but far away enough from the city that real nature was accessible. And so truly, my first spiritual teacher was the forests and the creeks and the animals around me. The trees were like companions. I was an only child. And so part of the journey of many only children, I think, is that we do spend a lot of time in solitude. My family was not religious per se. Both of them had been raised Catholic, but they'd had their own challenging experiences, going to Catholic school and, at a time when, children were raised to be seen and not heard. And so they didn't want me to be raised in the same way. I was really encouraged to find my own way, whatever that looked like. And from an early age, there was a seeking quality, there was a spiritual hunger, but I didn't quite know what it was called, what the name for it was, because I didn't have a religious community. So I was very fortunate, though, that I went to a very progressive, kind of hippie style school as a child. Beautiful, beautiful place called the School in Rose Valley. And we had sheep. We went on nature walks. We tapped trees for maple syrup. We spent an incredible amount of time outside, and we sang and we danced. And it was really this deeply powerful experience of, what community can be like under the best possible circumstances. I think truly that experience as a young child was life-saving to me in many ways. And of course, at this same time, I remember having some of these experiences. I felt called at a very young age to leave little offerings to the streams near our house. I had moments of sitting as a young child, I mean, probably 7 years old, closing my eyes and seeing the dance of color and light behind my eyes, and actually very quickly going into a very deeply concentrated meditative state where I began to see the way that my thoughts were arising and bubbling up, and that they were coming not from me per se, but from this sort of process of causes and conditions, and that you could encourage the thoughts to become stronger and stickier, or you could let them go away. And I remember running down to my mother and saying, Mom, I discovered where thoughts come from. And I think she was busy. She didn't realize that I had had this intense meditative experience that, as a meditation teacher now, these are some of the states that when people become deeply concentrated, they often fall into. I went through a really difficult adolescence, really profound depression and anxiety, and just a really, really hard time as a teenager. And very shortly after was introduced to kirtan chanting, a Hindu practice that's very ecstatic, chanting mantra. And that was really my first taste as a young adult of what it was like to be involved in spiritual community. I loved that because it was so joyful. It was so, very, very joyful, very ecstatic, very devotional. And there was something in that that really spoke to me. Over the course of time, I did get away from that and really focused for a while on trying to be, quote unquote, a grown up in the way that I thought that I was supposed to be. I studied religion in college because there was still a seed of interest and care and wanting to learn more and discover. But when it came to actual spiritual practice, I became distant from it for a period of time, thinking that it was, okay, time to grow up and be the kind of adult I was supposed to be, very serious. Over the next decade or so, that spiritual thread remained with me, but I became very engaged in social justice work. I went to graduate school in Europe and studied gender under post-state socialism. It was a different life trajectory. And then I had a traumatic event occur, and it knocked me right back on the path. There was a sense of, well, if I'm not living the life that I really want to right now, I better get on it. There's no time to lose. And I saw my friends who did have a spiritual practice, especially my friends who had a consistent, long-time Buddhist practice. And there was something in that, was very clear to me. I'd studied Buddhism. I had done some meditation retreat even at that point. But it was very clear to me that there was something there that was missing from my life. After that, I really dove in. I devoted myself to meditation retreat, to training in Buddhist philosophy, did some training in Buddhist chaplaincy, and the path really unfolded from there. From that point, I began to explore hypnotherapy, shamanic counseling, all of these other ways to help bring spirituality into people's healing work. And so today, the way that that looks is I regularly teach Buddhist meditation online and throughout the Southwest. I also work one-on-one with individuals as a hypnotherapist. And part of my focus as a hypnotherapist really, I do traditional hypnotherapy where people may want to make a change in their life, but I also do very spiritually based hypnotherapy when people come, especially after having profound spiritual experiences and saying, I need to figure out how to make meaning of this. I need to understand what's going on here. And so a lot of the time when people have a powerful experience on a meditation retreat or something like that, they'll often, people will send them my way to find a way of understanding more deeply and reconnecting with those experiences. So that's kind of the arc of how things evolved over the years.
Okay. Well, you mentioned a couple things. One is that period of depression that you went through, and you said that then you got introduced to chanting, was it? And
Indeed.
that helped bring you out of that. So how did you get introduced to that? What form did it take?
Yeah, absolutely. It was Hindu kirtan chanting. So it's a specific type of Hindu devotional chanting. A lot of folks who were involved in the yoga world might be familiar with it. I was actually introduced by my mother. She was very involved in that community at that time. She's had her own path of spiritual seeking and actually has her own practices now, meditation and shamanic practices herself, although they developed separately. We had our own paths to that. But, it just so happened that I went to check out these events that she was going to, and I really fell in love. And when I think about, the combination of, the devotional chanting, the sacred sound, the sense that there are, whether it's mantras or hymns or prayer that have been shared by people over and over throughout the centuries, that those sacred sounds, sacred syllables even have immense power. I think that there was something in that, and to be singing in community, that it entrains the brain in a very particular way where you feel a deeper connection with the people around you. With my work now, I do also look back and I see, one of the things that, whether it's chanting or shamanic drumming or mantra, one of the things that all of these have in common is a type of rhythmic, repetitive sound or focal point that allows people to shift the state of their brain. And part of what that can actually do is it can open up more space for neuroplasticity, for actual changes neurologically in the brain that weren't as possible before. So if you're stuck in a rut where you're very depressed and you're very anxious, and then you engage in something like chanting, like shamanic drumming, where the brain is lit up in these different ways, that it actually does allow people in an evidence-based way actually to shift out of old patterns.
Yeah. So is your sense that it's the sound vibration that sort of resonates with a person's brain and makes that connection? So is it a physical vibration, or how do you think about what is happening then?
I wish that I knew more about it because there is a number of different perspectives. There are Buddhist teachers, especially in Tibetan Buddhist traditions, where it is that vibratory quality of the specific sound that they're pointing to as particularly healing. When I look at things, though, like shamanic drumming, what's happening there when someone does a shamanic journey, which is usually induced by rhythmic drumming, rhythmic chanting, in Australia, the didgeridoo, a repetitive sound, is that that sound actually entrains the brain to drop into a different brainwave state. So there's also that. And then, you look at all these incredible studies that I wish I knew more about around music and the transformative capacity of going to a concert and being in this musical environment with a group of people, or going to, people have this experience in church with singing and music in church, where it becomes a very elevated, very transcendent experience because of the way that it actually creates a group uplift. So I would say that probably all of the above and then some were happening at that time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. When you talk about a shamanic journey, often, I guess, people think about plant medicine and plant medicine being involved in that shamanic journey. But I get a sense from you that you're more in the, I guess I recently learned about shamanic journey traditions worldwide, that only a small percentage of them involve plant medicine, and actually the majority do not. And from the sense that I get of you, you're of the do not camp in the plant medicine arena. Am I reading that right?
You're reading it right in the work that I do. While I do support people who are preparing and integrating shamanic experiences that did involve plant medicine, there are people who come to me and say, hey, I'm preparing for an ayahuasca ceremony and I need support, or I had an experience with plant medicine and I'm not really sure what to make of it. Can you help me understand? I do work with people in that capacity. But the bulk of the work that I do and the bulk of my own practice, you're right, is a type of shamanic journey that uses the rhythmic sound of the drum as opposed to some kind of an outside substance. Because the beauty of this is that this is actually a human technology, spiritual technology that we all are capable of. Every single one of us can drop into a trance-like state where you can do exploration, prayer, shamanic work, simply through the rhythmic beat of a drum.
Yeah.
It's all that's needed. And the fascinating thing, actually, there's a study that came out of the University of Michigan a few years back now, where they compared a group of people who were learning to do the shamanic journey with a drum and a group of people who had plant medicine experiences. And they found that the experiences of the people who journeyed with a drum alone were just as, if not more, powerful in terms of a sense of spiritual unity, insight, oneness with the universe as the people who were taking plant medicine. So I love this because I think a lot of people think that you have to have some kind of an outside source or substance or, whatever it is to create that kind of an experience, when the reality is that we actually have it within us. Yeah. Anytime, anywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, that's I think a very comforting thought for many. You mentioned a traumatic event that brought you back to your spiritual self.
Yeah.
Do you mind sharing what that event was, or would you rather not?
I would rather not because it's of a pretty personal nature. Suffice it to say, I experienced a violent attack. And so my process of trauma recovery as a young adult included coming back into my own spiritual experience and coming back to these parts of myself that I had kind of lost along the way.
Yeah. Okay. So some of your tools, for instance, depth hypnosis, my understanding of depth hypnosis involves past life regressions. So is that what you're doing with depth hypnosis, or is there more to it than just past life regressions?
It's a great question. There's a lot more to it, and I'm happy to share a little more. So, the depth hypnosis modality, which is one of several modalities that I work in with hypnotherapy, depth hypnosis was actually created in the 90s by Dr. Isa Gucciardi. And depth hypnosis is a combination of traditional hypnosis, shamanic healing work, Buddhist psychology and philosophy, and transpersonal psychology. So, what depth hypnosis really seeks to do is through the trance work of hypnosis to help people find their way towards healing, towards power retrieval or soul retrieval, which are shamanic terms, to understand and uproot some of the places where patterns of suffering are really entrenched and stuck. And so while past lives in this modality do sometimes come up, we're not necessarily seeking them out. You're just as likely to explore something that happened in your youth and bring resources and support and power into supporting that, young child perhaps that was in a traumatic or difficult situation. You may also do work with places where there's internal conflict, right? A part of us wants to say yes to the new job, a part of us is scared and wants to stay put. There are also processes within the depth hypnosis modality to clear energetic blocks, to bring in a greater sense of well-being and vitality and support. So there's a whole incredible breadth of directions that someone might go in that modality. One of the reasons that we don't specifically go just for past life regression, and there are a number of hypnotherapeutic modalities where that's really what they're focusing on, we don't go there just for the sake of going there. So if we end up connecting with some kind of a past life experience, it's in service of a very specific issue that the client wants to work on. So people don't come to me and say, hey, I just want to know what my past lives are. They say, hey, I keep on getting into relationships with people who are really mean to me, and I want a healthy relationship. Let's work on that. And over the course of time, it's possible we'll stumble into a past life. And, the beauty of that is past life work, it's fine for anyone, even if they don't believe in past lives. If a person doesn't believe in reincarnation or past lives, it can be looked at as archetypal or as symbolic or as, the mind's way of communicating a particular feeling or experience or habit or pattern. So, one thing that I would name too is, past life regression, if it does come up, it's totally okay if people don't believe in that.
Yeah.
It's still healing. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, that's very clarifying. I appreciate it. I'm thinking about, and I guess some of this question comes from looking at the Spirit Rock website. You've been working with Spirit Rock for a number of years now. And in fact, would you talk about how that association came about and why you're working with them for such a period of time now?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I work with Spirit. I teach at Spirit Rock as well as a number of other Buddhist centers throughout the country, especially a lot here in the Mountain West. But Spirit Rock really was one of my first spiritual homes. I began sitting retreats there first. Silent meditation retreats that were anywhere from 10 days to 2 months long. And when you are immersed in meditation in a community, in a beautiful place for so long, of course, you become very connected to the place and that community. Fortunately, I lived very close by, so it was very easy to bring that more fully into my life. But part of what really was transformative for me there, aside from my own meditation retreat practice, was over many years, I taught classes on meditation and mindfulness for middle schoolers and teenagers as part of Spirit Rock's family program. We also led family retreats where entire families would come to the meditation center, and it was like a family summer camp for 5 days where parents were finally able to bring their kids into this environment that already meant something very dear to them. Also supported teen meditation retreats where we'd take the teens somewhere over the week around New Year's, and they'd learn to meditate and they'd bond. It was sort of a mix for them of meditation retreat and group therapy in a lot of ways. And it was so powerful to see, all ages of people from very young. I remember one family retreat working with kids who I think were 6, little kiddos, all the way to working with teens. And I now often guest teach for their women's meditation drop-in class as well. And so, from 6-year-olds to 90-year-olds, it's been amazing to see the arc of discovery of practice and spirituality for people.
Yeah. So your status, for lack of a better word, I guess, you are a community Dharma leader. What does that mean, and what does it entail?
That's a great question, and the information is slightly outdated, but that's okay. So within the insight meditation tradition, so this is insight Theravada Buddhist-based communities throughout the United States as well as Europe and beyond. This is kind of Western convert Buddhism. There is a structure of who is teaching what, who is leading what kind of groups. So a community Dharma leader is somebody who's been trained to support communities through offering meditation teaching, Dharma talks, classes, day-long retreats. And then from there, one receives authorization from their teachers to also teach residential retreats. So this is silent meditation retreats where people are there for several days at once. And so I am actually an authorized retreat teacher as well as a community Dharma leader. But there are, various levels of training that go into that, basically. Yeah.
Okay. So in addition to that, you are an ordained minister with the foundation of the Sacred Stream.
Mm-hmm.
What is that?
That's a great question. So, the foundation of the Sacred Stream is the organization founded by Dr. Isa Gucciardi, where people train in depth hypnosis, train in shamanic counseling. This is a Buddhist based organization. So technically, I am a interfaith minister with Buddhist leanings, basically. And that ordination process is something that many people who are depth hypnosis practitioners also go through, simply to deepen their capacity as a spiritual counselor.
Okay. So it's counseling. Do you perform Buddhist weddings and funerals, or is that part of sometime?
It
That's part of
certainly is
ministry.
something that I am authorized to do. I don't do it a whole lot, but it certainly is. The way that my own work really takes me is more in that spiritual counseling, holding groups, holding classes where people can deepen their own practice. That tends to be the way that it finds its way through me. But also yes, every now and then there's a wedding or a memorial or things like that also requires support.
Okay. So it sounds like your mother's path and your path are similar in nature. Would you say, and I'm curious about how your father fits into all of this picture or doesn't fit into this picture, just because I've interviewed quite a few spiritual people, and there's, I don't know, I always find an interesting familiar dynamic, and sometimes a daughter's connection is more closely related to her father than her mother, and sometimes the reverse. And it sounds to me like you and your mother are pretty tied together here.
In some ways, yes. Although, much of our spiritual journeys have been entirely separate, and we came to a lot of these experiences on our own. She started working with shamanic practices when I was a teenager. And as a teenager, I was in a place where I was pretty ready to individuate. So, there were some things that I would go and attend. There were some things that I was like, whatever, mom, that's your thing. To me, in some ways, actually, my exploration of Buddhism was a way of exploring and finding my own spiritual identity separate from my family. So she then later on, of her own volition, came into contact with a number of people who also had Buddhist practices and got curious about it. And, we both have meditation practices, although they're in different Buddhist traditions. So, there's a spiritual inclination on that side of the family, I would say. When I look at, not just my mother, but I look at my women cousins and my aunts. One of my beloved aunts actually is a deep Buddhist practitioner. We run in the same circles. We know many people in common. So I would say actually she and I have probably the biggest spiritual overlap, and she's been a major influence in my life. I lived with her many times when I was in my teens and early 20s. She's also been very important to me, but all of the women on that side of the family, there's a little bit of mysticism there.
Yeah.
And that is something that is very much woven into that ancestral thread. Although interestingly enough, I would say my dad's side of the family, they're not overtly spiritual in the traditions that I practice, but I'll tell you, we've got a lot of Catholic priests on that side of the family.
Okay.
So there's a lot of spirituality that weaves its way through. It just has expressed in different ways. I don't think that my father entirely in the past had understood some of the path that I was on. Although I remember, this is probably 15 years ago at this point, a doctor told him to take a mindfulness based stress relief class, MBSR. And he did it, and he came to me a little later and said, I think I understand why the stuff that you're doing is important. If I had had some of these tools when I was younger, I bet my life would have been completely different. So, there are these threads that weave through families in different ways and present themselves in different ways. So I would say probably there's a little bit on both sides.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So was the move from the Philadelphia area to New Mexico something that happened early in your life, or is this a later evolution?
Well, that one was later. I've lived in a number of places. So when I was 17, I left home and moved to California for a period of time. My need was to get out of the nest as fast as humanly possible at that age. So I booked it out of there pretty much as fast as I could. I was ready for some independence and for my own journey. So I was there for a little bit. Then I went to college in North Carolina. I lived in North Carolina for about 6 years. From there, I went to grad school and lived in Budapest, Hungary for a period of time. Back to North Carolina for a year because so many good friends were there. And then I lived in California for 12 years. So I was in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is where Spirit Rock and a number of other Buddhist centers are located, and then moved to New Mexico in late 2021, early 2022. But part of the motivation to be here in New Mexico, actually, my partner had been involved for a long time with a Buddhist retreat center here in New Mexico that happened to be led by one of my most significant teachers and mentors. And so that's Vallecitos Mountain Retreat in northern New Mexico. And so we came out here. He had been working at that retreat center for, many years. I supported a number of retreats there as well. And, we really fell in love with this area and knew that it needed to be home.
Yeah, no, I get it. My brother lived in Taos for a number of years,
Beautiful.
and I went out to visit him and kind of fell in love with the country out there. It is beautiful.
Yeah, it's a really special place. Yeah, the Vallecitos, the retreat center, is about an hour and a half from Taos. So right up in that same neck of the woods. And it's just gorgeous. Yeah, really special place.
Yeah. Yeah, I have fond memories of that area. So I wanted to weave in this article in Tricycle that is fairly recent, I take it.
Depends which one. I'm curious which
okay.
one you're seeing. Yeah.
I guess I'm just referring to your most recent one. So how did you connect with Tricycle, and what has that relationship been like?
Oh, yeah. Well, I've written a handful of pieces for them. I've gotten a little bit off the habit of writing as much as I would like to over the last year because it's been such a busy time. But, it's a Tricycle. I've been a reader for a very long time. And there was, I think, the first time I reached out to them, there was just something I felt very compelled to write about and ask them if it felt like it might be a fit, and it was. And so I've gone on to write a number of pieces for them over the years, really particularly around Buddhism and culture, meditation practice, different pieces. It's a Buddhist journal, and so really speaking to the meditative side of things and the way that as Buddhist practitioners we relate to the world. So there's been a number of fun experiences writing for them, and I've loved working with them. It's been a really welcoming group of people to work with.
So how often do they publish? Is this a quarterly?
It's a quarterly magazine, but they also have a website where they're refreshing articles and content pretty much every day.
Oh,
It's a great resource for people who are curious about Buddhism and meditation.
yeah.
Mhm.
So if they just go on tricycle.com or something, they can access it.
Tricycle, it should be tricycle.org. Yeah, that's right.
Okay. All right. Which reminds me, while I'm mentioning that, if people are interested in contacting you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. My website is julianasloane.com. That's JulianaSloane.com. And folks can find, all kinds of resources there, from meditation groups and retreats that I'm teaching in the year ahead, as well as exploring one-on-one hypnotherapy and shamanic counseling work together.
I just want to mention, be sure to put an E on that Sloane, or else you get a very famous actress. And
Yes. I was the only Juliana Sloane for many years. I think she's a little bit younger than I am. And over the last few years, I think her fame has really blown up. And people often misspell my name. They'll put an extra N into the Juliana, or they'll leave the E off of the Sloane. So I think it probably happens more often than not that people looking for one find the other.
I managed to do both as I was doing research on you. So I can see why other people do that.
Yeah.
Okay. Your venture into Europe. I guess what sparked your desire to do that? And what was your takeaway from that experience that brought you back then to the States?
Yeah, great question. One of the things that I really hold in my life as a point of belief and trust is this knowing that I have seen in my life, at least, over and over and over, that when there's some change that needs to happen, or there's something that's very needed, it's like a little trap door in the universe opens up, and it just sort of nudges you in the direction that you're meant to go in. And so for me, I would say that actually living in Europe and going to graduate school there was one of these kind of magical little trap doors in the universe. At the time that I went, what was happening, I was in my early 20s. I'd graduated college fairly recently. I was living in North Carolina and working at a public radio station. And, life was good, but there was a part of me that wanted more. There were needs I had for learning, for career, for discovery, that I wasn't ready yet to totally settle down. And so I started to apply to Fulbright grants to see if I could get a grant to do research and work somewhere outside of the US. I'd lived in Germany for a period of time when I was in college. I'd traveled to Hungary and was very interested in what living in Eastern Europe, Central and Eastern Europe was like. And so I started this process of applying for Fulbright grants and fellowships. And I was waitlisted. I was the runner-up for the Fulbright to go to Budapest. But in the process of that application, I had written to this university, Central European University, which was founded by George Soros, with a big emphasis on understanding democracy, understanding nationalism, bringing together people from all over Eastern and Central Europe, as well as, other places in the West, to study and learn together. And I had gotten into an email correspondence with the woman who was running the gender studies graduate program there. And one day an email popped into my inbox. And then she said, would you be interested in just coming here and getting your master's? Because we'd be interested in having you. And I went through the formalities of the application process and ended up with a full fellowship to get a graduate degree. All of my tuition, all of my housing. It was like a miracle. It was an absolute miracle, and it allowed me to really expand my horizons, to meet people from all over. I had classmates from Russia and Ukraine and Kazakhstan, as well as, the US and Romania and Poland. It was such an incredible immersion in really connecting with people from all over the world. And there's no way I would have been able to afford it in the United States. No way. So it really felt like a little piece of magic. And I think in some ways also this was 2007, 2008, right around when the recession was really heating up. It also took me out of that economic environment. So I feel like in some ways it really was just kind of like some force in the universe scooped me up and said, you know what, why don't you go over here for a little while, honey? And I just feel incredibly grateful for that opportunity. It really was deeply, deeply meaningful.
Well, when you said good question, I am really glad I asked that question. Who knew there was such a university?
Mm-hmm. It's a really, really cool place. I mean, it truly is. It's now no longer in Hungary anymore. As Hungary becomes more nationalistic, they sort of pushed it out, and so now it's actually located in Vienna, Austria. But it's an amazing institution and a really accessible way for people from all over the world to deepen their studies. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that reminds me of a Rotary scholarship that's available that a lot of people don't know about, for people who want to go into peace studies. And they have peace universities in 7 or 8 different locations around the world.
Wow.
Where if you want to do your graduate program in peace, that's something that you can take advantage of, get a full scholarship, all expenses paid, and
Absolutely.
a lot of those people end up working at The Hague or at the UN. And anyway, there are a lot of unknown opportunities like that just sort of float out there in the ether.
Absolutely. And those educational opportunities are so important. I was fortunate enough, I went to a Quaker college for my undergraduate, and so similarly, that thread of peace and justice and the way that peace work and spirituality are intertwined. There's something about being able to be in a learning community that holds those shared values that's incredibly powerful and really does set people on a particular course for their life and for any efforts to make the world a a slightly more humane place.
Yeah. Yeah, there are a lot of light workers out there now, though, and that's good to
Mm.
know. So, believe it or not, we've just about chewed up an hour. And it's always at this point that I give the guests an opportunity to leave our audience with a few words of wisdom. So take your best shot. This is it.
Oh, it's been really lovely spending this time connecting today, Bob, and thinking about what would I leave people with? Really, as I'm reflecting with you on this arc of experience, I think the thing that I would leave people with is if there's a part of you that feels a calling to explore something new or to try something different or to go a little bit against the grain so that you can deepen your spiritual practice or your healing or your learning, I would just so urge people to listen to that. You never know where it will lead you. I never thought that some of the adventures and the beautiful moments that I've experienced over the years would be possible for me. And you just never know what's around the corner. So really, really invite people to take that little leap of faith. It might be small, but there might be something that's really calling to your heart.
That sounds just great. So, audience, as always, take what resonates with you and incorporate it into your life and put the rest on the shelf until you're ready to deal with it. And until next time, this has been your spiritual journey.